Sophia first noticed them on a Tuesday. She had been up late, as usual, sitting by her apartment window, the glow of her laptop casting long shadows against the wall. Outside, the streets were mostly empty, just the occasional car rolling past, headlights sweeping over cracked pavement. But then she saw them. Figures on the rooftops. At first, she thought they were statues, perched at the edge of the buildings like gargoyles, motionless against the night sky. But something about them unsettled her. Their silhouettes were too thin, too long, their arms hanging at their sides like lifeless things. She stared at them, waiting for some sign of movement. None came. The next night, they were still there. And the night after that. It wasn't until the fourth night that she saw them move. It was subtle, just the smallest tilt of a head, the barest shift in posture, but it was enough. Enough to make her blood run cold. Sophia closed her blinds. She tried to ignore them. She really did. But the problem with knowing something is watching you, is that it never quite leaves your mind. The next night, she forced herself to look again, and that's when she saw it. They weren't just watching the city, they were watching people. From her window, she could see the sidewalk below, the occasional pedestrian walking home from late shifts, from bars, from whatever lonely places people came from at that hour. And each time someone walked beneath the rooftops, the figures above would lean in, stretching impossibly far over the edge, their limbs bending like they had no bones, their heads cocked at strange angles, listening. And yet, no one noticed. Not a single person looked up. Not a single person shivered, or hesitated, or sensed the things looming above them. Sophia's skin prickled as she watched. And then she saw the first one crawl down. It moved in slow, jerking motions, sliding down the side of a building like a massive insect, its fingers pressing into the concrete as though they could sink into it like flesh. It reached a window, third floor, just across the street. The glass slid open. No one was there to open it. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She waited, expecting to hear something, a scream, a struggle, something, but there was nothing. The window shut again. The thing was gone. The lights inside flickered once, then steadied, and then, moments later, a man walked out of the building, his face blank, his steps slow and uncertain, like he was sleepwalking. He didn't look up. He didn't look anywhere. He just walked, disappearing into the night. Sophia slammed her blinds shut. That night, she barely slept. She told herself she had imagined it, that she had been awake too long, that the isolation was messing with her head. But when she checked the news the next morning, she saw it. Local man reported missing, last seen leaving his apartment late last night, no signs of forced entry, no indication of distress, simply walked away. Sophia felt sick. She had seen him. She had watched him walk out into the night like a puppet with its strings cut. She didn't check the rooftops that night, or the next. She tried to pretend she hadn't seen anything, that none of it had been real. But deep down, she knew it was, because even without looking, she could feel them. They were still there, watching, waiting. And then, on the seventh night, she made the mistake of checking again. Her heart pounded as she peeled back the blinds just an inch. The rooftops were empty. For the first time in a week, there was nothing there. She exhaled, relief flooding her chest. Maybe they had gone. Maybe whatever nightmare she had stumbled into was finally over. And then, from the corner of her eye, a reflection. In the window. Not hers, behind her. Sophia turned slowly, her breath caught in her throat. The thing was in her apartment. It stood just inside the doorway, that hunched and unnatural, its limbs too long, its fingers twitching. And as it stretched toward her, its head tilted, its face a void of shifting, writhing shadows. It had been watching her too. And now it was her turn. The last thing she saw before the lights flickered out was her own window, sliding open.
Mark had lived in the apartment for 3 years, and he knew every inch of it, or at least he thought he did. But one night, he found something impossible. A door at the end of the hall that hadn't been there before. It was old, much older than the rest of the building. The wood was cracked and warped, the paint long peeled away, revealing the splintered surface beneath. It had no handle, no peephole, just a heavy, iron keyhole near the center, shaped like a jagged, gaping mouth. Mark frowned. He could have sworn that part of the hallway had always been a blank stretch of wall. He had walked past it 1,000 times, but now The door stood there like it had always been waiting. He reached out, hesitating just before his fingers touched the wood. The door felt wrong. Not cold, not warm, just alive. A quiet, wet sound came from the other side. Something was breathing. Mark snatched his hand back and hurried inside his apartment, locking the door behind him. That night he barely slept. The next morning the door was gone. Mark stared at the blank wall, heart hammering. He ran his hand over it, feeling only solid drywall beneath his fingertips. He tried to convince himself he had imagined it, that maybe he was sleep-deprived, hallucinating. But deep down, he knew better. 2 nights later, the door was back. Only this time it was closer. It was no longer at the end of the hall. It was just a few doors down from his. Mark's stomach twisted. He stood there, staring at it, willing himself to turn away. But then, a sound. A low, wet scratching, like fingernails dragging along the wood. A faint whisper. "Let me out." Mark's breath caught in his throat. He turned and rushed back to his apartment, slamming the door behind him. That night, as he lay in bed, the air in his apartment felt heavier. The shadows seemed darker, and beneath the hum of the refrigerator, beneath the distant creaks of the building settling, he could hear it, the door, moving closer. By the end of the week, it was right outside his apartment. Mark stood frozen in front of his door, staring at the thing just a few feet away. The keyhole gaped like an open wound, the blackness inside impossibly deep. The whispering had stopped, the scratching had stopped. Now there was only the breathing, long, deep, wet, as if something on the other side was waiting. And then, the knob on his own door turned. Mark stumbled back, panic rising in his throat. His door was locked. It had to be locked. The knob twisted harder, rattling violently now. He ran for the kitchen, grabbing the heaviest knife he could find. His breath came in short, uneven gasps. He gripped the handle so tightly his knuckles turned white. Then, silence. The rattling stopped. For a long time, Mark stood there, knife in hand, waiting for something, anything to happen. And then, a new sound, a slow, steady knock. Knock, knock, knock. Mark swallowed hard. The sound wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from inside his apartment. His mind screamed at him to run, but his body wouldn't move. The knocking came again, closer. And then, something worse. A door creaking open, not the one leading to the hallway, the one inside his bedroom. Mark turned slowly. The door to his closet was open, except it wasn't his closet anymore. It was the door, and from the darkness inside, something stepped out. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything. It was a shape without form, a shifting absence of light, its mouth stretching open wider, 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 until it was all teeth and void. Mark dropped the knife. He tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed before it could leave his throat. The door had found him, and it was so hungry. Liam always hated the night shift. It wasn't the long hours or the boredom. It wasn't even the way the office felt different at night. Like the walls absorbed too much silence, like the empty desks held onto something heavier than dust. No, what really got to him were the cameras. They lined the wall of the security office, covering every hallway, every entrance, every floor of the building. Flickering, outdated monitors that gave everything a slightly warped look, as if the footage was never quite real. He had worked the job for months, and the shifts all blended together. Check the cameras, walk the halls, lock up if someone forgot. Nothing ever happened, until the night the static started. It was 2:47 a.m. when it first flickered. Camera 6, one of the long hallways leading to the emergency exit, cut to white noise for 3 seconds. Liam frowned, leaning forward, probably just a signal issue. Then the feed came back, and someone was standing at the end of the hall. A tall figure, thin, unmoving. Liam's stomach tightened. No one was supposed to be in the building. He switched to another camera. Nothing. Flipped back. The hallway was empty again. His breath slowed. A glitch. Had to be. He tried to ignore the way his hands felt suddenly cold. 3:14 a.m. It happened again. This time the static lasted longer, 5 seconds. When camera 6 returned, the figure was back, and it was closer. Liam swallowed hard. He leaned in, squinting at the screen. The figure stood halfway down the hallway now, just beyond the reach of the emergency light. No features, no face, just a dark outline, vibrating slightly, like a bad signal barely holding onto the screen. A deep sense of wrongness settled into Liam's stomach. It didn't feel like a glitch anymore. It felt like something was looking at him. He flipped to another camera, then another, then another. Nothing. When he flipped back to camera 6, it was gone. The static buzzed in his ears, even though the screen was clear. Liam exhaled, rubbing his temples. He needed to stop drinking so much coffee during these shifts. That's when he noticed it. The radio. It was on, playing nothing but low, crackling static. The volume knob twisted slightly, turning up on its own, and then just beneath the static, a voice, a whisper. "You see me now." Liam shot out of his chair, his breath coming hard. The radio was unplugged. A chill crawled up his spine. He glanced at the door to the security office, half expecting to see someone standing there. Nothing. He turned back to the monitors. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating, but he had to check. Camera 6 was fine. Then camera 5, camera 4, all clear. Then camera 3. His stomach dropped. The figure was there, not in the hallway anymore, inside the building, standing in the break room facing the camera directly. Liam's breath hitched. That room was right down the hall, empty seconds ago. He reached for his radio. His voice shook. "Hello? Anyone in the building? This is security. If you're still inside, you need to come to the front desk immediately." Silence, then a burst of static, then, "I'm here." But the voice wasn't from the radio, it came from the hallway. Liam froze. Something was breathing just beyond the security office door. Slow, wet, deep. His fingers hovered over the lock button on the security panel. Then, the lights flickered, the screens glitched, and the door handle began to turn. Liam backed away from the door, his pulse pounding. The monitors flashed with rapid static, every camera in the building cutting in and out, hallways, offices, the stairwell. And then, one by one, each camera showed the figure. Not just in the break room anymore. Now it was in the lobby, the elevator, the empty offices. It was everywhere. And worse, it was getting closer. The security office lights cut out, total darkness. Liam's breath came in quick, ragged gasps. He couldn't see the monitors anymore. He couldn't see anything. Then, a faint, buzzing glow. The static returned not from the cameras, but from the door. It seeped through the cracks, the light warping, bending, as if something was just beyond it. And through the white noise, a whisper, "Let me in." Liam squeezed his eyes shut. Not real, not real, not real. The radio crackled again. "You can see me now, Liam." He opened his eyes, and the door was open, just an inch. And in the glow of the monitors, he saw it. The figure standing just beyond the threshold. Its limbs were too long, its head twitching slightly, like it was trying to stay in focus. Liam couldn't move. The figure stepped forward. The monitors all cut to static. And in the darkness, the last thing Liam heard was the voice, right beside his ear. "Now I see you too."
The first message came at 2:13 a.m. Melanie was barely awake when her phone vibrated on the nightstand. She groggily reached for it, expecting a late text from a friend. But the number was unknown. "Come back," she squinted at the screen. Wrong number. She almost ignored it. Almost. But something about the words made her pause. Come back. Like she had been somewhere she shouldn't have left. Like she had forgotten something important. The next morning, she checked the message again. It was gone. No trace of it. Weird. But not as weird as what happened that evening. She was driving home from work when she saw it. The house. Tucked at the very end of a road she was sure she had never taken before. It shouldn't have been familiar. And yet, she remembered it. The sloping roof. The way the windows reflected nothing. Just black glass swallowing the world. The porch with the broken step. A step she was sure she had tripped on once. Melanie's foot hesitated on the gas pedal. She felt something tighten in her chest. She knew this place, hadn't she? A cold sweat broke across her skin. She didn't even realize she had stopped the car until a second later. Her phone buzzed in her lap. "Come inside." She sped home, locked the doors, drew the curtains. But that night, the messages didn't stop. "Come inside, Melanie. You left something here. It's waiting for you." By midnight, she had 20 unread messages. Each one a photo of the house, taken from inside. She blocked the number, turned her phone off. The next day, she tried to forget, but the itch in her skull wouldn't leave. That pull. The house knew her. And worst of all, deep down she knew it too. By Friday night, she couldn't take it anymore. She had to see it up close. Had to know. So she drove back. The air was wrong when she arrived. The street was silent. No wind, no crickets. Even the cars parked along the curbs looked abandoned, as if no one had moved them in years. The house loomed taller than she remembered, its walls breathing in the dim light. The porch steps groaned under her weight. The front door was slightly open, waiting. Inside, the air was thick, stale. Dust clung to the walls, but the furniture, it was still arranged, like someone had just left, like she had just left. Her fingers trembled as she touched the old wooden table in the hallway. She had sat here once. She had lived here once. Hadn't she? A cold whisper crawled up her spine. She stepped further inside, and that's when she saw them. The photos, framed pictures lining the walls, every single one was of her. A child sitting on the porch, a teenager staring out of an upstairs window, a woman standing in the front yard. She had never been here before. Had she? Then, from upstairs, a creaking floorboard, a footstep. Melanie's breath caught in her throat. Someone was up there, someone was moving. The text came in before she could think. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, a single new message. She didn't want to look at it, but her hands moved anyway. She swallowed hard. "Don't go upstairs." She turned. The staircase loomed, stretching into darkness. A shadow moved at the top. Her phone buzzed again. "You're not supposed to be here." "You left. You were supposed to stay gone." Melanie's breath shook. Then she noticed something horrifying. The front door. It was gone. Not shut, not locked. Just gone. Nothing but a solid wall where it had been. She turned back toward the stairs. The shadow at the top of the steps tilted its head. Melanie felt her legs freeze. It started coming down, slowly, each step creaking louder. The phone buzzed. "Run," she sprinted. Her hands scraped against the walls, trying to find a way out. But the house had changed. The hallways stretched too long. The windows were bricked up. The thing wasn't walking anymore. It was crawling. Faster. Close enough to touch her. The last message flashed across her screen. "You shouldn't have come back." And then, the house swallowed her whole.
James first saw the face on a Tuesday night. He was scrolling through old photos on his laptop, organizing them into albums, vacations, birthdays, old school memories. He wasn't really paying attention until he noticed something wrong. In the background of a group picture from college, a man, not a friend, not a classmate, just standing there, out of focus but staring directly at the camera. James frowned, zooming in. He didn't recognize him. Tall, thin, eyes too dark, as if they were just empty spaces. The more James looked, the more he felt an odd pressure behind his eyes, like the stranger was looking back. Probably just some random guy in the crowd, right? That's what he told himself, until he checked another photo, and another, and another. The man was in every single one. Different places, different times, but always there, watching. James' skin crawled. He checked his childhood photos. He shouldn't be there. He couldn't be. But there he was, a family trip to the beach, standing near the waves. His 8th birthday party, half hidden behind a tree. Even a picture from when his mother was pregnant, through the hospital window, staring in. James' breath hitched, his stomach twisted into knots. He grabbed an old photo album, flipping through page after page. And there he was, the same expression, the same empty gaze. But then, James noticed something else. The face was getting closer. At first, he was just in the distance, part of a crowd, but as the years went on, the photos showed him moving forward, closer, until in one, a picture taken just last month, he was directly behind James. James slammed the laptop shut. This had to be a trick, some stupid prank. But how? How could someone have altered his entire history? His hands trembled as he picked up his phone. He snapped a selfie, staring at the screen, just his own tired face. For a moment, relief washed over him. Then his screen glitched, for just a second, and when it cleared, there he was in the reflection behind him, standing in his bedroom. James whirled around. Nothing. The room was empty. His breathing was shallow, his skin cold with sweat. His mind screamed at him to leave the apartment, but he felt frozen, trapped in some waking nightmare. His phone buzzed, a new message, from an unknown number. "You finally see me." James's breath caught, his ears buzzed with static. Then, his phone screen lit up again, a new photo. It was him, taken from inside his closet. His stomach twisted, his eyes slowly drifted toward the closet door. It was slightly open, just an inch. A darkness too deep inside. His phone buzzed again, another photo of his back. He was no longer alone in the room. A new message popped up. "Smile,